Welcome to episode 36 of the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. And today's topic, world building trap, paralysis by analysis. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. I am your loving host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. And let's get right into today's world building trap, which is paralysis by analysis. One of the problems people have when they are telling stories and they're trying to get something done, especially I think for the first time or before you get to the point where you're sharing them, and I'm probably as guilty as anyone, and I'm sure there are exceptions of people who don't do this, but if you're a perfect writer, you just don't need this. However, if you're like me and sometimes your mind tells you fears and worries and concerns, something John Acuff would call voices in your head, not in a schizophrenic way, but it's those voices that tell you, no, people don't want to hear your story. No, it's not that good. No, your world sucks. When you start getting these voices, you fall back on something more comfortable. And for me, that's world building. For you, it might be something else. It might not be world building. It could be world building if you're a loving world builder like I am. However, the thing you have to understand is world building is nothing more than a framework that you're creating to tell your story. That's it. If you have one story, there's probably going to be a lot less world building. If you're like me and you want a world that is a framework for stories to happen in, there will be more world building. But ultimately, in the process of doing your world, you are going to come up with stories, and you're going to share the stories. So how do you know when it's happening to you? First thing is, you stop while you're writing your first draft to go back to world building. And when I say that is like, oh, my map sucks, my map's not good enough. I just listened to Jeff's episode of maps and I didn't think my rivers through correctly. I don't know where my rain precipitation levels are. Where's drier, where's warmer, unless it's a desert. I haven't really thought about that. If those thoughts are going through your mind when you listen to any episode of my show that is causing you to stop your draft that you're working on, whether it's for a video game or an RPG or for a story you want to tell or for a movie or any other way you found to share these stories, if you're stopping your first draft, you're wrong. You're trapped. When you make the world every time you start a revision. So I finished my first draft. I went back and I rebuilt 3 times during the first draft. Now I get a draft back from beta readers or an editor. I get that content back. I view that content and I go, my world sucks. No one likes the names of my culture. I have to redo my culture. No one likes this. No one likes that. And I end up rebuilding my entire world top to bottom. I have to go through when I edit it in the rewrite. I have to change a whole bunch of names, a whole bunch of this, a whole bunch of that. It is your mind giving you an excuse to stop telling the story and to go back to world building, which is behind the scenes, something you don't share, it's safe. And ultimately, it's when you avoid writing or storytelling because you have to work on the world. When you keep coming up with excuses to stop moving the content you're going to share to go do something else, whether it's playing a video game or world building or watching a wonderful show on TV, it does not matter because you're never going to get done because you are in paralysis by analysis. The thing you got to keep in mind when you're world building, and this is not necessarily true for every world builder, but if your point is to share stories, even if it's just at a game table with a few friends or family, or if it's a larger scale thing where you want to do an indie book or get published, make a movie or a TV show or a video game, the point is the story. And don't give me some silly thing like, well, my game's going to be like Civ, so there's no story. Of course there's a story. If you talk about a game like Civ, the story is me, the player, rewriting history. And that is the story. And it's not a complicated narrative unless I'm a bad player. But you got to stay focused on delivering the content. In whatever form you come up with your content, you need to deliver it. And when you let any part of it, the rewrites or the world building or some unrelated task, get in the way of delivering the stories, you have fallen into the paralysis by analysis trap. And I sound very acquainted with this trap. This is my trap. And I've been kind of going through this earlier this year where I've had a book ready to start self-publishing, and I've been putting off, coming up with excuse here, excuse there. If it's not world building, it's my podcast. If it's not my podcast, it is, well, I'll start that tomorrow. You just got to do it sometimes. And I guess it's another John Cuff book, but that's not related to this. Okay. So what is okay? Because there are legitimate reasons to do some world building as you're going through your first draft. Just to let me define what I mean by first draft, for me, it is spitting out the story as fast as possible. If you really do it and you're not focused on language, you're not focused on too much stuff, except getting the story on paper, you can do a first draft 50, 60, 100,000 words in a month. No problem. NaNoWriMo should not be hard if you're not letting the traps hit you, whether they're world building traps or otherworldly traps. So when do I pause writing my first draft for a world building reason? I have just a few listed here. And there could be others, but I think I have enough examples here that you'll get the idea. 1, I am pausing to record a new word I've just made up. So especially when I'm dealing with someone who speaks a different language than the book's narrative, it will be in the language of the world, not in English, which is the language I attempt to write. But when I do that, I like to record the word and the meaning, just so later on I know I have a word for that in the meaning. And it's easier if I have a language pre-built. If I don't have a language pre-built, it kind of sucks. But that's okay, because then you have to kind of make all of these things come and work together, which in a way might not hurt, because if you're constructing a language from some pre-existing ideas, it will create some conflict in the language, and it'll probably even make it a better language than the ones you start from scratch, unless you really screw it. Okay, you want to record a new unexpected world element. You want to record a new unexpected world element. So you decide to introduce this character who you weren't planning. And it's a minor character. You're adding it in for some flavor in the book. You start talking about a culture that you've not finished the world building for. You don't even have a language for that culture yet. There's maybe even speaking the local language. It doesn't matter, but you don't have that language written. So don't stop. Go construct that culture from the ground up. You're adding the character because of the way they work in and add to the story that you're creating. So don't get too hung up on the culture and a character like that. I would want to know a few basics about the culture, and if I don't have that, I'd want to scratch down some major ideas for the culture, that cultural norm graph that I have. And it won't be perfect, but it'll give me an idea. And then I want to know how far they deviate from it. Like if it's a culture that never travels, and you have this character from a different culture in a different place, you know that at least for that one element, he's way off the cultural. But don't sit there and go through all of the steps to properly create a culture and a language and a religion and all of that stuff. Trap down the specific content you're adding that would be involved to that culture. And depending on how important the character is, there's less of it. But you only want to create what you need to move the story along. You are world building as education and are just using stories to explore your world. So if you're someone who's really world building because they want to understand how the world works better, the science behind the world, and how they could apply to creating a fictional world, really to learn the task, and your goal is not to share stories, it's okay. And it's neat to do that kind of thing. And maybe you'll get a passion and want to start sharing those. And I'd maybe reflect on why you would think those stories aren't shareable. That's your choice ultimately. But if it's really an education first process for building a world, then then you should actually, then it would be, the reverse would be a storytelling trap, paralysis by analysis, which would be a different episode. Tips. Now I use Scrivener. So in my world building Bible, I will have a folder for every state, every culture, every religion, and that way I can access the information very quickly from wherever I'm at. However, I try not to reference that more than I need to for this. If I need a specific word from a culture, I might have to open it up. But I would probably take the notes I need specific to this and move them over, or create a link to them. Whichever way works easier for me. It's usually just a cut and paste thing. So I will take the elements I need and put them in my story manuscript file, so I don't have to keep going back to it. The problem is you need to track your changes, so don't put them in the information in this file. What I do is I have a folder in my research that has new world building elements. And so whether it's a character or a culture or a nation I've talked about for the first time, or any world building element that I want to talk about, it goes into this folder if it's not already in my Bible, my world building Bible. It'd be strange if it was in the actual Bible, because I don't fiction based off of the actual. Okay. Write yourself a go, go, go note. Now, a go, go, go note is, maybe it doesn't say go, go, go for you, but it's to remind you when you're writing your first draft, go, go, go. Don't get caught on details. Don't look for the perfect language. Don't worry if the scene doesn't feel fleshed out enough. Get your story on paper. You can add chapters, you can add scenes later on to fill in and flesh out the story. But get the basic story down. And if you're looking for a novel, it'll be like 50, 60,000 words. Definitely. Maybe more if it's a longer. And again, for all of these elements, just record what you need for the story. Just know that you need enough. The only time you should consider stopping to do any real world building is if the accidental character you're adding in from that different culture really becomes essential to the plot. If you don't know that culture at that point, you need to make a lot more notes. But especially if it's ancillary character added for some world flavor into your story, you don't need a lot. The real world, the writing for this episode is basic. You need to be aware of what are your strengths and weaknesses when you write. You need to be aware of your strengths and weaknesses when you write. So this is a basic episode, and whether it's this trap, another trap I've talked about in the past, or what I want to talk about in the future, be wary of world building traps. And I've been talking a lot about those more so than other kinds because those are typically the traps I fall into. The real world task for the day: create your go, go, go note. Something inspirational that will keep you motivated. Put a little post-it note, stick it up on your monitor or right next to your monitor on the wall if it's available, somewhere that you will see it, and it will keep reminding you to go, 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 get the manuscript done. Because you're probably not going to have 40 hours plus a week to write your manuscript. So when you got a 2-hour block, even if you're tired, you sit down for 10 minutes and you write for 10 minutes. If you can keep going, you keep going to fill out that block. If you can't, well, you can't, but at least try and get 10 minutes done, no matter how tired you are. And remember, it's a first draft. You're going to revise it at least once before you consider sending it out. Or if you're me, you revise it 500 times. And have the document for 10 years before you consider sending it out. Yeah, that's a different trap, but that's a storytelling trap. Well, maybe I will start doing some storytelling. I've been thinking about doing storytelling too. Start having an episode a week on storytelling, but I want to get through the first, what I consider the basic topics for world building, and then I can have some checklists that are useful in a newsletter on Gardual.com. So you have a cultural, state, all kinds of different checklists. The real world task for the day, while you're making that note up, if you haven't heard this one, you've not listened to all my episodes, because I go back to it a lot. Make up notes for your spouse, your loved one. Simple notes. Hey, I love you. You're sexy. You're smart. You take care of me. Whatever you think will work with your loved one. You kind of hide them around the house in books that they're reading, on the steering wheel of their car. So at different times and different places, they'll bump into them randomly. Sometimes a lot longer after you sit them down. Sometimes you'll actually forget about them. But it's still my favorite tip, and I want to still go back to this tip over and over. Hopefully not every episode. There will be other things in here too, but that is the real world of task for the day. The tease for this episode is cultural and racial links in your fantasies. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardul.com to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.